Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum. Oh, and I think maybe now we are streaming live.
Okay.
Shelley or Denise, can you confirm that?
Yeah,
It looks
it
like
on
it's,
my screen. So
yeah.
this meeting, the October 9th meeting of the Legislative Auditor will come to order. And we have a full agenda today. Members of the audience, we are starting a little bit late so that we would have Facebook Live streaming. We are conducting this meeting virtually pursuant to the rules that have been adopted by the House and the Senate. Ms. Randall, do you want to maybe just go through a chronology or a schedule of our activities in the next couple months?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Judy Randall. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. Nice to see you, see all of you on the call. Just for the record, I do want to note that it's October 8th, if that matters, rather than October 9th. So we're having this meeting today, and the agenda is before you. And then the plan is to hold 2 more hearings. We're going to be looking to schedule one in mid-November. November 12th or 13th is what we're looking at right now. And at that meeting, we expect a number of things for which the commission will need to take action. One will be to receive and review and accept the performance reviews of the legislative auditor and deputy legislative auditor. At that point, also, I believe Mr. Nobles will be asking you to approve his appointment for the deputy of the Financial Audit Division, and he will be introducing her later today. And then at that meeting, if the commission wants, we will have additional discussions about our role doing the single audit. We can have discussions related to the budget. And then we will also have a OLA housekeeping bill that we will be presenting to you all, and we will have that for discussion. Then the plan, Mr. Chair, is to have one more meeting in the middle of December. Again, we haven't scheduled that, but we'll make sure it's not too close to the end of the year or the holidays. And at that point, the commission will have kind of additional discussion and then decide if it wants to take any action on recommendations related to the housekeeping bill, the budget, and our single audit proposal. So those are the items that are on tap, at least as of now. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Nobles, any opening comments or suggestions?
Mr. Chair, no, not really, other than just to again thank everybody for assembling in this meeting, and to you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair, for scheduling these other meetings. I think they're going to be important for us and for you, particularly for your consideration of my appointment of a new deputy for the Financial Audit Division, but many other matters as well. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us.
Thank you. And so we'll move into the agenda. And first up is Greg Hubinger, the Executive Director of the LCC. And Mr. Hubinger, I want to start out by thanking you for your years of service to the people of Minnesota. You've done great work, and we've asked you here to maybe just give a closing comments from your career on the LCC and how it works with the legislative auditor and kind of those roles, and any perspective or any exit interview thoughts that you might have relating to the Office of Legislative Auditor and the Commission. So thank you again for your service and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I am Greg Hubinger with the Legislative Coordinating Commission. Thank you for your kind words and for your invitation to be with you this morning. I think those that know me or know my work understand that I would prefer to be presenting a labor contract for the Employee Relations Subcommittee or a benefit book plan to the LCC than just talking generally. But I would like to recognize the important work of the Office of the Legislative Auditor and especially your commission. It reflects, I think, the ability of the legislature to work in a bipartisan manner on the critical work of legislative oversight of state agencies. I think it also reflects the dedication of members who are committed to the quiet work that consumes your valuable time to ensure the integrity of state government. I'd also like to recognize the valuable work of the staff of the Office of the Legislative Auditor. My experience with them is that they are extremely dedicated to the office's work. Their financial audits and performance evaluations routinely alter the way that state government provides services to Minnesotans. And your commission plays a critical role in that endeavor by ensuring that program evaluations are selected based on a public process and agreed to by those with election certificates and on a bipartisan basis by the commission. The value of this work is ensured by having top-notch managers leading the office. Mr. Nobles and Ms. Randall are knowledgeable, insightful, principled leaders who ensure that the 60 staff are able to carry out their work effectively. Hopefully they will be joined soon by a deputy for the Financial Audit Division. I also want to commend your current work to evaluate the performance of the legislative auditor and the deputy. I think your efforts reflect recent efforts in the legislature to conduct evaluations of their staff managers, an important task in managing a large organization. I think I've made the observation to some around me that I have never seen a legislative candidate's lawn sign that promises to be involved in managing the legislature as an employer. But as an enterprise with some 500 employees and an operating budget of $95 million, careful oversight of your management is critical for the overall success of the work of the legislature. I would also like to acknowledge the work of all of the joint legislative staff that support the legislature's work: the reviser, the reference library, the legislative budget office, and the legislative commissions, the Pensions Commission, LCCMR, Bessard Sams, and the Subcommittee on Water Policy. All have duties that have been statutorily assigned to them by you. These staff are dedicated to that work, supporting the legislative process in the same manner as the legislative auditor. Finally, I want to recognize the Legislative Coordinating Commission, whose staff are completely dedicated to supporting the joint offices and legislative commissions and the work of the legislature generally. It has been my privilege to have been part of that team. Mr. Chair, thank you again. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Members, are there any questions for Mr. Hubinger? Please raise your little blue hand if you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nobles.
I don't have a question, but I would just like to thank Mr. Hubinger. He and I have worked closely over many years. It always concerns me, though, when a senior member of the legislative staff retires. It sort of leaves me as kind of the old guy, still standing. So, but I do want to thank him for all of his work. Wish him well in retirement. I've heard from others that that's a pleasant place to be. Although what I usually hear is that because you're going to, have more free time, other people are going to try to fill it up with home projects or taxi cab work for grandkids or kids or just all kinds of things. So, I hope you will enjoy it. I'm sure you will, Greg, and you well deserve it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions or comments, just to echo that, Mr. Hubinger, I've enjoyed working with you, and on behalf of the commission, thank you again for your service, and we wish you well in your retirement.
Thanks,
I just wanted.
Oh. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, Mr. Hubinger, how much I've enjoyed working with you. We get a little double dose of that because of the Legislative Budget Office and a lot of things going over this past while, and just really want to appreciate the time that we have had with you. You've been a real stable, solid person that I think a lot of us have gone to for advice, questions, and information. You've always been available and willing, and just want to really appreciate that and wish you really well, and try and fight off some of those, let yourself have some time to actually enjoy that time with your grandkids or whatever it is that you've got going on, and not take on those things like Mr. Nobles mentioned. But we wish you well in whatever choices you make. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Anyone else? Thank you. Senator Cran, if you would like to give an update on the executive committee activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We held the executive committee held a meeting last week to talk about performance reviews and what that process would look like. And I think it was a great, lively discussion. All participated, and the goal was to try and get an outline of what that process looks like. We haven't done it before, but the goal is to get an outline. We did to try and, I think, some of the key things about the conversation were preservation of privacy, yet seeking input and inclusion from as many as we possibly can, including members, and then have that managed by or assist us in managing that with the resources we have available. With that, we came up, I think, with a good structure and some of the timelines, or I guess some of the key components are, we're going to work with the new LCC director, Michelle Weber, and we're going to have them help coordinate between members or the LAC and interviewing members of the Office of the Legislative Auditor to seek input on performance in those activities that go on in the OLA's office. We are still looking for, I think Rick, the chair, and myself, we're looking for a Republican or a Democrat member that would like to do that or participate in that. If not, Rick and myself will take on that task. The dates, October 9th, we determined will be the date that the legislative auditor will provide us with a self-assessment. That self-assessment will include what the activities are, the accomplishments of the past, look at some of the obstacles, and then really look at, as I look at this whole process, as an opportunity to kind of build that roadmap for our future. What are the things that are working really well? What are those that aren't? I think Ms. Randall spoke earlier about single audit. How can we better realign the resources to better meet our needs with all the financial pressures we have on everybody? We need to make sure we're getting the greatest value out of our most valued staff in the place office today. And then the October 16th, I think, was the date we agreed upon, which we will have the staff reviews. So the deputy directors, and that would be provided or completed by then. In the meantime, we will, the chair and myself will be meeting with Ms. Weber to coordinate wanted to meet with Mr. Nobles and talk about the review process and the self-assessment, and then work with Michelle Weber to lay out the rest of the calendar of the process, kind of backing into our end goal of November 15th of accomplishing all of our tasks that we have laid before us. And she's going to be doing that, and so we'll have a few things running simultaneously. So your feedback is going to be welcome, and we'll issue additional communications to everybody as we move through the process. So, Mr. Chair, I think that covers everything that I had in my notes. Anybody, did I leave anything out?
Senator Cran, just maybe a clarification. So the LCC would be doing the administration to protect data privacy and confidentiality. So there's a division of responsibility. Maybe you just highlight, we had quite a bit of discussion on that. Senator Cran.
You are correct, Mr. Chair. So the LCC was to help us preserve that, to make sure that we have a neutral third party to help us preserve the privacy, but yet at the same time create a comfortable environment for people that are willing to share information, those things that are working really well, those that are not, and we need to preserve that anonymity throughout the entire process. So, lots of lively debate on that subject.
I just have one comment.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you. You asked for a GOP volunteer. Just want to let you know we can take care of that. I will volunteer.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Members, are there any questions of Senator Cran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all we have in the report.
Thank you, Senator Cran. Mr. Nobles, onto the agenda. So the single audit.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was just looking at the order of things, and if you don't mind, I think I would like to go to introducing my appointment for the new deputy for the Financial Audit Division, because I think she's going to have some things to say maybe about the single audit issue. So I want to welcome her into that conversation. So members of the Legislative Audit Commission, I'd like to introduce to you Lori Lyson, who is a CPA and has been with OLA for a significant number of years. And because of her talents and her diligence and hard work, she's moved from, being an auditor, junior auditor, all the way up to being one of our most important leaders in the office as a director of a team of auditors. And it's just so gratifying to me that every time I've lost a deputy, and unfortunately over my extended period of time, I've had a number of deputies, there's always been another person to step up and take over the challenge. And Ms. Lyson, because of her experience at OLA, she understands us very, very well. Our function, our mission, the standards we have to uphold. And I think also what's important is that she brings experience from the private sector, the nonprofit private sector. So she has extensive knowledge and experience in accounting, auditing, managing. And I just feel very fortunate that she was willing to apply for this position and that she was willing to take it on. It is a very big job, very challenging job. And so, Lori, if you are with us, I'd like to have you just say a word or two. And I know that in the November meeting, there'll probably be a more extended discussion with you from members preceding your confirmation. But if you want to just introduce yourself and say a few words, I think that would be very helpful. And then we'll move into, and please join us in the discussion about the single audit.
Ms. Lyson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Lori Lyson. Prior to my appointment by Jim, I was audit director in the Financial Audit Division. I've been with the office for just shy of 8 years. And prior to that, I was in social services for a number of years, 10 to be specific. I really appreciate the opportunity to step into this role. I am very much dedicated to the mission of our office. And I look forward to, if I am appointed, or if you do confirm Jim's appointment, I look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Members, are there any questions for Ms. Lyson? Welcome. Mr. Nobles.
Well, if we could then go into this discussion of a topic we've had quite a bit of discussion about previously, but let's just review it one more time. And I did send the commission a memorandum on this issue back in September, and I think we resent it today. And the foundation for this discussion is our constant effort to utilize our resources in a strategic way. I think all of you on the commission know that we have just a vast area of jurisdiction and responsibility. And so with a relatively small staff, we really have to be strategic. We have to apply, I think, the most important principle, and that is one of the statements in our mission, and that is we are here to strengthen legislative oversight. So over the years, we have taken on the responsibility that the state of Minnesota has to have an independent audit of the state's use of federal funds. And it's a particular kind of audit because the federal government prescribes exactly what has to be tested, how it's tested, and the reporting. And so that goes to the federal government Now, I know, of course, that all of you are concerned about the agency's use of federal money, particularly in social services, but in other areas as well. That's a big component of the state budget. We will still be able to cover that, those expenditures, that activity, but we will do it with more of a focus on what interests and concerns you, state laws, the things that you have written as mandates and requirements for the state agencies that have federal government, federal funds. Because under the single audit, again, we do what the federal government wants us to do. And that doesn't always produce, I think, and our auditors think, an audit report that is of primary interest to state legislators. So we have requested that we give this responsibility back to MMB, and MMB would decide how it wants to fulfill that responsibility. There is nothing in the law that requires us to conduct the single audit. We took on that responsibility many years ago, and as I've also said to the committee before, the money that supports this really stays with the executive branch. OLA, when it took on this responsibility, did not receive increased funding or staffing. We just made it as part of our schedule. So if we are able to give this back to the executive branch, they will need to hire an independent CPA firm. And what we have learned, and it's in your packet as one of the exhibits, many states do fulfill this responsibility of conducting the audit called single audit of the state's use of federal funds by using outside firms. It's a real mix. I mean, some have an outside CPA firm do all of the work. Some of them coordinate with the state auditor, legislative auditor. And there are states where the legislative auditor does that work. But as I've talked to my colleagues, and we just recently had a virtual conference of all of the auditors around the country, as well as federal auditors, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the desire on states to really utilize their resources to audit the kinds of concerns and issues that state legislators are more interested in. So that's what is before you. It's my understanding, Mr. Chair, that you would probably reserve action on this until a future meeting, but we certainly can discuss this. And again, Ms. Lyson is here with us, and she has gone through many years of doing the single audit. She has a considerable experience and knowledge of it. And Gloria, maybe I'll just ask you, if Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, if Ms. Lyson would like to add a few words on her experience with the single audit.
Ms. Lyson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Knowles is correct. I have worked on single audit for a number of years, and as I mentioned during our last LAC meeting, there are some concerns in the value that we're bringing by doing the single audit work. First and foremost is that it is an audit of federal money, and so we aren't touching on state money unless there is a matching requirement. Then we are looking at that. Otherwise, the money that we are auditing is all federal funds. And I gave an example during our last meeting of some of the things that we need to audit according to and as required by the federal government. Another example that I could provide today is we do have to do some subrecipient monitoring, and that is, what does the state do to monitor the federal money that is being granted out to other entities outside of the state. And one of those things that we have to do is look at the federal award information that is provided to those subrecipients. And there are a number, I want to say it's 17 items, that might not be accurate, but it's approximately 17 items that we have to ensure that the state is providing to the subrecipients. And some of those are just looking at the award number, making sure that they're showing the indirect cost rate, and the value that that provides for the state of Minnesota and the legislature, specifically I don't feel like that is there. I don't think that our work is valuable if we're looking at 17 items that are being conveyed to the subrecipients. That most of the time, those subrecipients are the same each and every year. They're counties that have receive grant money from the state over and over and over again, and then we're required to do that work. And as I mentioned before, we're calculating cash draws and at times interest. And so I just really want to convey that we do agree that the federal single audit is important. We understand that that money, there's large dollars coming through the state and they do need to be monitored and there needs to be oversight of that. But again, our role in our exposure to state government, I think could be used in other ways that are much more valuable than the single audit work that we perform that takes up a good portion of our year. And with that, I'll open up to any other questions anyone may have for me.
Senator Coran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And between Mr. Nobles or Ms. Lyson, could you cover, we carried a bill for this, and I don't remember what the exact total is, but Mr. Nobles, could you lay out kind of the resources that are required? That I think the primary agency is Department of Human Services, but I believe there's a permanent or a significant full-time staff there. And then could you cover how that staff grows with the utilization of total number of staff and the period of time in which you serve just to complete the single audit?
Mr. Nobles.
Thank you. And Ms. Lyson can certainly join with me. Well, we anticipate that, and by the way, in the financial audit division, we work and schedule all of our work by hours. And I don't know if that will translate to you, but the way we work is we know we have a certain number of hours because we have a certain number of staff. They work, a certain number of hours on audits. We also have to allow for some time for training and other kinds of things. But we estimate that this year, for example, we will have to spend over 19,000 hours to complete the single audit. That's because, and that's a little bit of a growth over last year, and that's partly because of the new CARES Act. The pandemic money that the state is receiving also comes with audit requirements. And it came in as a requirement rather late, and even the requirements for the audit came in quite late. And so actually that sort of almost tipped the balance in a way towards our discussion internally and with the commission that we just cannot keep doing this for all the reasons that we've already stated. So that's around, the number of hours that it takes, as Ms. Lyson said. It's a big part, a big percentage of the number of hours that we have and that we utilize for something that we just don't think returns a good value to the Minnesota legislature. Lori, you want to just amplify on the kind of scheduling and timing and staff that it takes to get the single audit done?
Ms. Lyson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, as Mr. Noble said, it's approximately 19,000 hours. And I would say that during that time, we began that work approximately, depending on the individuals that are available, we begin the work in August, and then we end the work sometime in February or March. Typically, we're still wrapping things up in March. The report is submitted March 31st. We are balancing our 30 plus staff between both the financial single or the federal single audit and also the state's financial statements. But a majority of those in our office are working on the single audit, if not all, at one point, starting in January through February and into March. It is the entire financial audit division that is working on single audit. And then I think, prior to that, it's approximately maybe not quite half that are working on single audit up until that January date. It takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. We usually are working quite a few hours in that time beyond our normal kind of 2-week pay period. And so we're stretched pretty thin. It's again, it's about the value of the work, that it's really a struggle to just commit ourselves to something. And obviously we do each and every year, but it's hard to justify the amount of time that we spend on work that is just not bringing the same value to the state that we feel that other audits would, like our performance audits that we perform during the spring and summer months.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Cran, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Nobles and Ms. Lyson. I think that really does highlight the portion of, you just identified half your staff is there full-time. The remaining of the staff is then reassigned to DHS, pulling them away from all the other valuable activities throughout the agencies, throughout the state, on your existing obligations, as well as the portions we're missing is, a significant resource to apply or do some more process audit, life cycle process audit, which we miss dearly here, or lack dearly. So 30 full-time members are either partially or full-time assigned to complete the single audit. So I think this is a great, valuable discussion that we have to figure out a way to better use all of those staff. They're highly trained. You just don't come into these roles and become highly effective in a short period of time. So we need to move them off of more mundane, routine activities that are maybe certainly another company, or there's dozens of companies who qualify to do this, and preserve this valuable staff for really high value activities to serve this role. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lyson and Mr. Nobles.
Senator Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. I don't know exactly how you would get paid for the audit of the CARES funds, and so given the burn rate that is currently happening with CARES funds, do we need to think about earmarking some of that money to make sure that if you have to do just the federal compliance work, that is at least covered? I'm not clear as to how your work would be paid for, or how the single audit would be paid for with the CARES money. And beyond that, something for this group to think about is, do we need to have some additional audit money for a more intense audit for the purposes of the legislature? So Mr. Nobles, if you could think about a response to the first question, is there CARES money to pay for the single audit? And should we be earmarking that as held back for those purposes?
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Nobles, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Yes, there is money. Every time the federal government provides money to the state, there is some money available for overhead administrative costs, and that includes the cost of conducting audits. That money stays within the executive branch, though. And as I think I've said before, we've never had that money appropriated to us. So the money from the CARES Act, the money that is available to be used to audit and fulfill the audit requirements of the federal government for the CARES Act, is at MMB. And so I did have a conversation with the commissioner and expressed to him that it was going to be very difficult for us to do all the rest of the single audit and then take on the new CARES Act. And we talked about options, and just for that piece, just the CARES Act, the new money that has come to the state recently. And, it's all been done rather quickly. And so the federal government has kind of struggled to put together exactly what they want audited and which things that they would want an auditor to look at. So we've been waiting for that, and it really hasn't come to us. So in my conversation with Mr. Showalter, he agreed that he would seek an independent outside auditor to take on that responsibility, since he has the money available to pay for that. So that's where we are right now. and then the work on the CARES Act would be folded in to the states reporting to the federal government on the state's use of federal money. So I'd be happy to try to follow up and clarify that if you have additional questions.
Senator Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Nobles. I am on I think all of the LCRC meetings, and I haven't seen the audit request come forward. And so I think some communication that makes that clear, and I'm happy to be part of that communication with the commissioner, because it should come forward so that the legislature understands that the money has been set aside. Because right now we don't have any visibility as to the burn rate, and we have until the end of the year to expend or to incur expenses that could be reimbursed. And so if you're talking with Commissioner Showalter, I would be happy to be included on a communication that says, you know, let's bring this forward to the LCRC so the legislature knows that it is part of the responsibility. So however you would like to handle that, I just want to make sure that the money is available.
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Nobles, you're muted.
I have a hard time figuring out this technology. I do want to make it really clear, though, and I think Senator Ress asked this question in our last meeting, and I think it's a really important one, and that is, if we more or less give up the single audit and somebody else does that mean that we will never be auditing the state's use of federal money from a state perspective? And the answer is, we still have jurisdiction over all the money that agencies spend. And we would want to go in and look at their use of federal money. But we would want to do that under the kinds of concerns and issues that you have, rather than the ones that the Office of Management and Budget and federal agencies dictate in their audit requirements. So if the commissioner figures out a way to do an audit of the CARES Act to fulfill the federal requirements, we can still come back with our jurisdiction and look specifically at concerns that you, Senator Benson, or others have about how the CARES Act money has been used, or any other federal money. I would note, for example, that not that long ago, we did a special review and investigation of the overpayments to certain tribes for an opioid treatment drug. And some of you remember that audit, that the state was reimbursing over $400, as I recall, for a take-home pill for somebody to take. And we did that under our jurisdiction, even though that was all federal money. That was 100% federal money. And we even communicated with the Office of Inspector General when we discovered that was occurring, and they said, no, we're quite comfortable with you doing that investigation. And so that's what we did. And so I think, you know, it may seem a little bit confusing to people about this jurisdiction over federal funds. The important distinction is, you know, who determines what the scope of the audit is going to be, what is going to be tested, what is important to be tested. And we just think we would like to communicate with you, for example, with Representative Liebling and Senator Benson and others who have a particular concern about the CARES money or any of the human service money. And we would like that to be within the scope of our audit, rather than what Office of Management and Budget dictates.
Senator Benson, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Nobles, I'm still, I have kind of two questions. I'm still a little bit unclear. You talked about having talked with Commissioner Showalter about the CARES Act auditing, but did you have the conversation with him about what happens if the OLA gives up the single audit responsibility? I remember we talked about this at a previous meeting, and about how the agencies would do this work. And I think that you were also going to talk to Commissioner Showalter about that. And I'm not sure you really, I wasn't sure from what you said whether that was part of the conversation. So that's kind of my number one question. And then I'll have a follow-up, another thing, Mr. Chair, when we get off of that.
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Chair, Representative Liebling, yes, we have discussed the broader question of the executive branch taking over responsibility for the single audit completely. I've had that conversation with previous commissioners of the of MMB and with Mr. Showalter, who was previously the commissioner. And so they are quite aware of our concern about the use of our limited resources for doing that audit. And let me just emphasize, there is nothing in the law that requires us to do it. So I could simply write a letter to Commissioner Showalter and say, as legislative auditor, I am telling you, we're not going to do this. And the next time around, next year, when the single audit comes up, the dates, the requirements, it's on you. But I thought I really ought to bring this to the Legislative Audit Commission and not just act unilaterally, and have you aware and reach some agreement that that is a direction that you're comfortable with. You've heard our reasoning, but I do think we need to be on the same page that this is what you want the Office of Legislative Auditor to do. And Senator Cran and I've talked about this quite a bit, and he actually did have a bill that specifically directed the Office of Management and Budget to take over that responsibility. And I think that would probably be the better way to do it, rather than having the legislative auditor simply decide and tell MMB, it's now your responsibility. So the short answer is yes, Representative Liebling, we've had those conversations.
Well, okay, well, Mr. Chair, that kind of raised more questions for me than it really answered, because you know, I've come to understand the desire to not do the single audit. I think it does sound like it's not well placed with the OLA, and that probably something needs to change. On the other hand, we as legislators are not just members of this commission, we're also kind of, at some level, responsible for the whole thing. And so I kind of like to know what the response was. I mean, are we, you know, it's great, Mr. Nobles, you can tell us, I don't really have to do this, but it sounded almost like you're saying to us, we're telling you as a courtesy. It was first of all, I guess I'd like to understand, are you asking us to specifically authorize you to give up that responsibility and put it back on the executive branch? Is that what you're asking us for? I didn't hear in your answer anything about what Commissioner Showalter's response was. I mean, before if we're being asked to authorize it, I think it might be a reasonable thing to do, but I also want to know that it's going to happen and that it's not going to cause a big disruption, and that the executive branch is willing and able to take it on. So, you know, that's part of the consideration here. We're not just, you know, on the one side, we're on both sides. So can you just address it a little more? Where are we at with the discussion with the executive branch? And what specifically are we here being asked for in terms of, you know, are you wanting a motion to move this forward, or, you know, just exactly what? I'm kind of confused here, and I haven't even gotten to my second set of questions, which I'll just tell you what it was. It was really about, if we stop doing the single audit, obviously we're then freeing up a lot of staff time in the Office of the Legislative Auditor, which would be a terrific thing, I think, but also we're in this budget crunch time when we're going to be I just want to hear a little more about, I understand those staff are really overburdened with the single audit, that it maybe isn't the best use of their time, but I also wonder if we then would be looking at a situation where the office budget would be cut in some commensurate way, which I would, I just want to understand how this has been thought through, because, obviously if it's a third of the staff time, those people are going to have, need other work, or maybe they have other work, or I just don't have a good feel for what the plans are there.
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Chair, Representative Liebling, let me address the first part again. I am requesting that you approve transferring this responsibility to the office of the Department of Management and Budget. And in fact, Senator Cran did introduce a bill that specifically said that, and so that's I'm going to be bringing forth at I think the chair and vice chair's request what we have generally called a housekeeping bill. It will have various pieces in it, but and we've done that periodically in the past. But yes, I think it ought to be done by the legislature, not by me. I'm not just informing you that I'm intending to take that action. I'm asking you as a legislature to enact legislation that makes that responsibility clearly the responsibility of the executive branch. So, and in that process, I'm assuming there will be a great deal of discussion with the executive branch about exactly how they would manage that responsibility. I've had those conversations, but I think those conversations ought to be before the appropriate legislative committees so that you are completely informed as to how it's going to occur, and so that there won't be disruption. So that I hope clarifies why I have brought this to you. It's not just as a courtesy, although I certainly always try to be courteous towards the commission and keep you aware of what's going on in our office. But no, this is a matter, I think, of changing the law so that it is clearly the responsibility of the executive branch. As to what will happen with our budget and staff, our hope and our request would be that we maintain our current staffing and budgeting, and that we use the staff resources that will be freed up from not doing the single audit on more audits that we refer to often as control compliance audits or also performance audits, and that we could do a significantly larger number of those. We have jurisdiction over everything in the executive branch and the judicial branch, metropolitan agencies, money that goes to nonprofit organizations. We simply cannot be everywhere, but we would like to have an audit presence more in some organizations more frequently. I could probably give you a list of organizations and programs that we haven't audited in the last 10 years. And I just don't think that's providing the kind of legislative oversight and accountability that there should be. And the reason we can't do that is because so much of our resources are taken up with the single audit. So again, we would like to maintain the current staffing level in the financial audit division and redeploy those resources towards state programs, agencies, organizations, and have a scope and focus in those audits that is much more relevant to state legislators.
Representative Liebling.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's helpful. I guess if this would be considered in the normal course in legislation, and we're not being asked as a commission. I know we're asked as a commission to move forward or to give some kind of approval to legislation that you bring forward, Mr. Nobles. We've had that process happen, and the legislation, of course, can move forward if one legislator files it on each side or even on one side. But that's a bit comforting because the discussion is beginning, not ending. And certainly the executive branch and its response will have to be weighed in all of this, because I'm sure nobody on this commission wants this to just cease. And you know, obviously, if we are required to do auditing for our the feds require it, it has to happen someplace. So glad there'll be more opportunity for discussion. Thank you.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And frankly, if this had come up a year ago, I think it would have been a fairly straightforward and smoother process. We've got three factors popping up now. One, the looming deficit. Two, well, frankly, for most of the year, the executive branch has had spending authority and emergency processes that have allowed them to do activities that normally would be authorized by the legislature. So it's a little bit more independent in some of the activities going on. And the third is the huge influx of federal funds from the CARES Act and possibly other entities which might be of very high interest to the legislature. I like the intent. I think we should, if we do the go forward, the legislature pass, I would like the bill to have a component. Yes, we're stepping back. However, if the this committee or Mr. Nobles feels that there's a program that maybe should require more legislative oversight, that then we would have the option of being saying, MMB, you shall use the legislative auditor for this program looking over the federal funds. And then you would get the billing from the legislative auditor for the hours, because if we're transferring it to MMB, they're obviously spending funds hiring an independent auditor. And so normal practice then becomes they're paying funds for that independent auditor. If the legislature so decides that there are certain federal fund programs that require maybe a little more oversight, or we have concerns, then we say the legislative auditor is the independent auditor. And the new process is that MMB would then fund the independent auditor for those hours incurred. That's just my suggestion to the author of any possible bill. I was hoping the legislative auditor could maybe comment on that type of an approach.
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Quam, I agree. I want to just emphasize again that just because the state fulfills an audit of its use of federal funds through the single audit does not mean that the Office of Legislative Auditor cannot go in and do additional work with more of a perspective on state concerns. And in fact, that is very much what we intend to do. Because the federal money is so integral to many programs that we will not give up auditing those programs. It will just be from much more of a state perspective than a federal perspective. So I concur. There are a variety of ways and mechanisms to get it paid for. You suggested one that we would bill MMB. You could also simply appropriate that money to the legislative auditor, and then you would have the ability to ensure that we use that money to, as you suggest, go back and look more deeply at certain federal programs that are of concern to you. So there are a variety of ways to do that, and I think to get this done, and I think that'll be part of the legislative discussion in the next legislative session. So,
Representative Quam, any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the main change that I was suggesting is that if we go forward with the process, that MMB would fund it just like they would be funding any other independent auditor. And that way, we don't, as a legislature, have to go back and say we're adding X number of dollars for this and that, because the new standard process is MMB would be paying for these audits instead of getting it gratis from the legislative auditor. And if I could be useful to the author, I'm fully available. But you know, let's go forward with the discussion and have, I think, some legislation ready for the rest of the legislature to look at.
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Nobles, you're muted.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Quam, I certainly look forward to working with all of you on this. And so, yes, we will work out mechanisms that will be acceptable, not only to the legislature, but to the executive branch. I might just, in fact, I was going to mention when Representative Liebling was raising the issue about coordinating this and getting some buy-in with the executive branch, I would remind you that what I'm proposing here in terms of legislation requires not only the affirmative vote of the legislature, it also requires the signature of the governor. So we will be very cognizant that we are going to have to work out a process, a mechanism, a change that will be acceptable. You know, I have proposed changes, and the legislature has proposed changes. In fact, passed previous housekeeping bills where for one reason or another, they were not acceptable to the executive branch, and they were vetoed by the governor, various governors. So yes, this has to be a collaboration between the legislative branch and the executive branch, and it will include a lot of you. And so yes, we will go forward with that process.
Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Nobles. I support the idea that we signal as a commission the idea that MMB takes this over, and I think it's appropriate for us to talk about a motion or the best way to do that at today's meeting. I also think it's a somewhat separate discussion how we might use the suddenly freed resources of the legislative auditor should we successfully put that forward. And I think there's some opportunities in there for us to talk about how that type of resource might be best used in the future. We might really have an opportunity to do some good. Be that as it may, to me, that seems a separate question from will MMB take this over? And I, for one, would support the idea that today we bring a motion or some form of resolution that supports setting forth that MMB take this over, especially if there were funds appropriated to them for administration. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Nobles.
I did it. Unmuted myself. I'm certainly comfortable if you want to take some motion under consideration today, and then we can work on drafting that into proposed legislation. So I would leave it to the members if you want to make that motion, and Mr. Chair, if that's the will of the commission, I think that I'm certainly comfortable with that. In fact, I think that's a good idea.
Members, at the beginning, Ms. Randall kind of let out a laid out a timeline where we would probably have draft language in November and then adopt something in December. I think it would be important to have MMB actually at a meeting and describe it and get it on the record. So friends, I'm a little bit cautious of doing a motion right now. I think November, but it's up to the commission. So Senator Friends.
Sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand back up. I'm fine with that. I'm more interested in signaling my support for the idea that we prepare to have MMB take this over. And again, just calling attention to the fact that if we free up Office of the Legislative Auditor resources, hey, there's some upside to that for us and for the state, even though that is part of a different discussion. So if we don't do a motion today, that's fine. I guess the question for all of us would be, if such a general motion or resolution was passed today, does that help or empower Mr. Nobles in any of the discussions between now and the drafting of that legislation? And I defer to the experience on the committee for that question, but I would support sort of a signal, if that's the right term, that we as a commission like the idea that MMB take it over. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want us to get bogged down in this. I do think that it's important to work together with the MMB and to indicate to them that we are interested in the OLA relinquishing that responsibility to MMB. And if there's any motion, it seems to me it is to direct Mr. Nobles to continue discussions with MMB for the purpose of transferring this responsibility rather than requesting that it be done right now. So that actually would be my motion as a direction to Mr. Nobles, and included in that to invite Commissioner Showalter or his designee to our next meeting where this topic can be revisited. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we direct Mr. Nobles to continue discussions with our blessing with MMB, and to invite Commissioner Showalter or his designee to a future meeting to discuss this.
Senator Rest moves motion. I think, does everyone understand the motion? We will have discussion on the motion. Representative Erickson.
Representative Erickson, you're muted.
There I am, right? Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair and Mr. Nobles and Ms. Randall, I tend to agree with Senator Rest. Although I'm not sure a motion is necessary, if we give a directive to Mr. Nobles to continue discussions and perhaps include a memo that indicates our reasons for this being a good move on our part, because there's a huge accountability involved here. I know serving in education, we have many federal dollars that flow into education. Certainly looking at special education is another big area in education that I think could use some scrutiny from an audit. So that's my statement, that I would certainly support a motion if we think that's necessary, but I would think that a directive could work too, with a memo that's signed by our chairs that indicates we want further discussion and include our reasons for this necessary change, and make that based on accountability.
Senator Rest.
Mr.
Senator Rest, you're muted.
I offer a motion to make it crystal clear the direction we're going, and that there is no doubt in our minutes and the recording of this meeting that we are, as a commission, interested in moving forward on that. The chair himself could direct the auditor to do that, but I think that this is a big step, and it behooves us to do it as a motion, and I would hope it approval of it is going to be unanimous.
Any other discussion to the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with Senator Rest from the perspective of getting this formally identified in our minutes and to the public that this is our intent to continue a vibrant, healthy discussion and direct all resources, those legislative, as well as the Office of the Legislative Audit. I think, you know, in the past, our original bill was to redirect or to move the single audit out to redirect those resources to more valuable activities. I think it was more narrowly focused. Last year's bill was narrowly focused on where the redeployment of those resources would be. I think we have an opportunity to explore all discussions. What oversight? I think Mr. Noble has been very clear. They will all continue to have oversight. We have options to determine whether the contracting agency and of who that would be, MMB and or MMB in conjunction with the OLA, to continue to get great oversight to continue to do their job and provide that guidance. And then I think the other piece that we're working on is the formulation of our annual review process of the legislative auditor. And I think that is the process then which we started, which will then begin to provide a clear picture on what are our priorities, right? Built by the legislature as well as this commission. What are those priorities for redeploying the resources of the legislative auditor in those high value activities? So I think we have all the pieces in place. I think the formalization of those is what we're going through right now. But I think we have those two activities working together are going to provide us with a very clear path and a process for continued review on those resources to best serve the legislative audit for the legislature as well as citizens. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Representative Erickson, did you have a follow-up?
No, Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Yeah, thank you. I was glad to hear Senator Rest's motion. I'm not sure we need a motion, but I do agree with the sentiment. I think the sense of this commission is that we're interested in exploring this. I think Mr. Nobles has made a compelling reason institutionally for us to move the single audit elsewhere. So I think that that sense of that we're interested in exploring that, you know, I certainly support the idea, but I'm not ready to sign on until I understand more about how that all is going to work. So I like Senator Rest's formulation that as long as it's really clear in the motion that it's really an interest in exploring further, which I think her motion did do. So I don't know why we wouldn't go forward with the motion since she's made one, and I don't know if a motion needs a second in this context, but if it does, I would second it.
Thank you.
According to Masons, we don't need seconds.
We're still under Masons, so so we don't need a second. Members, are there any other questions or comments to the motion? Mr. Nobles, I think if the motion passes, that the suggestion for the memo describing things was important. Also the chronology, because if we're in the middle of CARES Act, you know, when would this happen? Would it be at the beginning of a new fiscal year? Is it phased in? What if there's a CARES Act 2, you know, and the involvement there? Could there be something done on acceptance of those dollars if the legislature hasn't acted yet? I think exploring those options are important. Members, because this is a motion and we are operating virtually, we do need to take a roll call. So we are going to do a roll call alphabetically if there's no other discussion. Ms. Randall, would you take the roll on the rest motion?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Shelley Gilb to take the roll for us. Thank you.
Shelley, proceed.
Senator Benson,
Aye.
Representative Bernardi,
Aye.
Representative Erickson,
Aye.
Senator Frentz,
Aye.
Representative Hansen,
Aye.
Senator Kiffmeyer,
Aye.
Senator Klein,
Aye.
Senator Karan,
Aye.
Representative Liebling,
Aye.
Representative Pearson,
Aye.
Representative Quam,
Aye.
Senator Rest.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Thank you. Mr. Nobles, any closing comments on the motion or the single audit?
Mr. Nobles, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just appreciate the discussion. This is a big step. It is important, and I think the commission and the legislature generally needs to be involved, as well as the executive branch. So I'm very pleased that you're willing to move forward with this discussion. Thank you.
With that, the related issue that we spent time on at the last meeting was the budget, and it's kind of dependent on the single audit discussion. I do see a hand up from Representative Bernardi. I'd like to call on her. I know she had another meeting. So Representative Bernardi.
Hey, thank you, members. I just wanted to mention that I heard November 12th as being a meeting that has been scheduled for the OLA, and I wanted to make sure that that was accurate, that I heard that accurately. Okay, I'm hearing nods. So, Mr. Chair, I just was communicating with the with staff back at the Capitol, and although there hasn't been a special session scheduled for November, if there was, based on what's been scheduled this time, it could likely be November 12th. So I wanted to let you know if you wanted to reschedule that, to be extra careful.
Thank you, Representative Bernardi. We've been struggling with November because that is a potential special session. And then we have the 15th when the performance reviews must be conducted by, and the 15th is on a Sunday, if I believe. So we look possibly at going on the 10th before, or the 11th we can't, that's Veterans Day, the 12th. So that's I think why Ms. Randall said possible, because what happens in October will depend on what happens in November, and we know that that'll be a challenging scheduling, but we need to get the performance reviews done by the 15th to follow the requirements. Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite sure what the question is for me.
I think we're on the budget, or moving into the budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were on the schedule, and the schedule is really up to you. The budget, yes, we do have a document in your packet that lays out some options. And again, Mr. Chairman, I think the schedule is that you will be taking up the budget recommendation either in November or December. And I think it would be really good to have an extended conversation at a future meeting about, we're going to have to bring in, as you just said, the single audit issue, as well as the budget options. So I don't know how far and deep you want to go into the ones that we've presented, but I definitely would like the commission at some point at a future meeting to formally approve what you think our budget should be. And then we would be able to take that forth into the legislative session with the approval of the Legislative Audit Commission. So, Ms. Randall, I don't know if you want to specifically, and Mr. Chairman, if you want us to go through the individual options, but there are various moving parts that I'm not sure that at this meeting we're going to be able to come to a conclusion on what you feel comfortable with approving. So I don't know if you want to go further on this or you want to defer this for a future meeting.
Members, I see Representative Erickson and Representative Bernardi's hands still up. I don't know if they have questions on that particular, or if their hands are still up from the prior questions. Members, I'm getting notes that my internet connection is unstable, so I may disappear from this meeting without my consent. But I think we need to look at those budget. Maybe Ms. Randall, if you could just put the budget sheets up for transparency so the public can see and that members can look at again. And it is very dependent on the single audit, but also on the budget forecast that we would be getting at the end of November and the budget process that the executive branch is going under. So if we maybe want to look at those again and consider and think about it. And if members have questions between now and the next meeting, to check in with Mr. Nobles and Ms. Randall on what the impacts are, and then we have a more robust discussion as we move forward.
Mr.
does have his hand up, or maybe Senator Cran, should we have Ms. Randall put those up first?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask if Shelley could put those up. She is the one sharing the screen and has the documents. So Ms. Gilb, if you could put up the OLA budget options on the and share your screen, that would be helpful. Thank you. There we go.
Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we had a conversation at the high level in our previous about the budget, but I do think that we're in the middle of the process of evaluating staff, going through the OLA review, as well as trying to map out what we think that those resources are, where we think the resources should be deployed and what should be the focus. That will be the activity over the next month, and I think we shouldn't. I don't think we have enough information to be able to make a decision or even guide down any one of the 5 options at this point. So I think that this is the process that we need to vet over the next month, prepping for either the November 12th or 13th meeting or whatever date we ultimately hold that meeting. So I don't know, unless there's other members who weren't here at the last meeting to cover this high-level overview, but I think the next month is the process for the time frame necessary to thoroughly evaluate where we want to go and to provide guidance then for the OLA on what option we would like to pursue. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'm getting a sense we should keep thinking about the budget, proceed on the process, go through the reviews, have that beginning of the discussion on the single audit, and come back at some time in November, whenever we fit that date, before the 15th of November. Is there any other discussion? I still see hands up for Representative Erickson and Senator Cran.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I lowered my hand.
Representative Erickson. I want to make sure if you're, Mr. Nobles. You're muted again.
Mr. Nobles, you're muted.
It's hard to figure this out. Just want to say again, thank you for all the time you're putting into this. I know you're all very busy with many other things, but so it really is a signal of how important you think the work of OLA is and of the Legislative Audit Commission. And it's really gratifying, and I appreciate it. And I know all the staff at OLA appreciates your involvement with our work. So thank you.
Thank you, members. With that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That great state. Nice dog.